She had watched quietly for weeks. She had absorbed every comment, every look, every moment that didn't sit right. But the morning Princess Charlotte came to her with pale cheeks and pressed lips, something inside Catherine shifted. And once it shifted, it never went back. Most people see the royal family the way the palace wants them to. Smiling photographs. Coordinated outfits. Carefully worded statements about unity and love. But behind those images, something else was happening. Something that never made it into the official press releases. Something a mother noticed long before the world ever would. This is the story of what Queen Camilla did to Princess Charlotte when she thought no one was watching. And what Catherine did when she realized she had been watching all along. Keep watching. Because what unfolds inside these private rooms will stay with you long after this video ends. It had started like any other spring weekend on the royal calendar. A private luncheon at Windsor Castle, honoring one of Camilla's charitable patronages. These gatherings happened regularly enough that no one treated them as anything unusual. Several generations under one roof. Camilla's circle. Catherine's family. A collection of extended royals who didn't always mix comfortably but kept up appearances with practiced ease. Catherine didn't mind these events. She had learned to navigate them years ago. But she had also learned to stay alert. While William could relax into the familiarity of his family home, Catherine still watched. She had always watched. It was the instinct of someone who had entered this world from the outside and never fully stopped reading the room. That afternoon, Charlotte had been seated with the younger royal cousins in one of the side salons. A formal enough setting, but relaxed by royal standards. Children expected to behave, to make polite conversation, to enjoy their afternoon tea without causing disruption. Catherine had helped Charlotte into her seat, kissed her forehead, and left the room with one last look back. Nothing seemed wrong. Not yet. But 45 minutes later, something changed. Catherine was mid-conversation with a senior courtier when she caught a movement in her peripheral vision. Charlotte was walking past one of the open doors across the corridor. She wasn't crying. But her face had gone pale, her mouth pressed into a tight line that no 10-year-old should have to hold. She looked bruised in the way that doesn't show on skin. Catherine excused herself and followed. She found Charlotte alone near the far end of the hallway, standing by one of the service doors with her hands clasped in front of her, eyes on the floor. "What happened?" Catherine asked gently. "Nothing, Mommy." Catherine crouched to her eye level. "Sweetheart. I know when something's wrong." Charlotte's voice came out small and careful. "Granny Camilla said I was showing off. She told me not to speak unless I was spoken to." Catherine didn't respond right away. She pulled Charlotte into a hug and held her there, steady and warm on the outside, while something inside her went very still and very cold. She had spent years maintaining peace with Camilla. Years of careful navigation, polite smiles, and choosing silence over confrontation. She had assumed that whatever tensions existed between adults would stay between adults. She had never imagined they would find their way to her daughter. She was wrong about that. Later that same day, during the family walk through the Windsor Gardens, Catherine stayed close to Charlotte. Camilla walked ahead with Charles, chatting easily, carrying herself with the lightness of someone who had long ago stopped wondering what others thought of her. Catherine watched her the whole way. At the refreshment table afterward, Charlotte reached for a second scone. Camilla turned, glanced down at her, and said with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Perhaps one is enough, darling. We don't want to appear greedy." Catherine saw it clearly now. It wasn't one comment. It wasn't a bad day or a misread moment. This was a pattern. Small corrections. Quiet dismissals. Each one aimed at the same child. Each one wrapped in the language of manners so that objecting to it would make the objector seem unreasonable. But Catherine had spent enough time in rooms like this to know exactly what she was looking at. That evening, back at Adelaide Cottage, she waited until the children were settled and William was off his call. Then she told him everything. Not with anger. With clarity. She laid out each moment in order. Charlotte's pale face in the hallway. The comment about speaking out of turn. The scone. The pattern. William listened without interrupting. When she finished, his jaw was set. "This isn't something we let slide," Catherine said. "I agree," he replied. "But we handle it carefully." That night Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed long after the little girl had fallen asleep. She wasn't ready to leave the room. She looked at her daughter's face, completely unguarded in sleep, and felt something harden in her chest that she recognized as resolve. She had been patient. She had been gracious. She had extended every courtesy that was expected of her in this family. But there was one thing she had never been willing to trade for royal peace, and that was her children's sense of their own worth. Whatever it cost her, she was not going to let Charlotte grow up feeling small inside her own family. But that is not all. The worst moments were still ahead. And what happened next, inside a sitting room at Highgrove, in front of Charles and William and anyone else who cared to witness it, would change things between Catherine and Camilla permanently. Keep watching. She hadn't planned to say anything that night. She had told herself she would be patient, that she would wait for the right moment, that she would handle it the way she always handled things inside this family, quietly, carefully, without making anyone uncomfortable. But the right moment kept not coming. And Camilla kept talking. The incident at the sitting room started simply enough. After tea had been cleared at Windsor, the adults moved into one of the rooms off the main gallery. It was an old habit from the late Queen's time, a way of extending the afternoon without it feeling forced. The children were allowed in briefly before being taken upstairs by their nannies. Charlotte came in with George and Louis, her expression neutral, doing what she had been taught to do. She found a chair near the fireplace, pulled a book off the shelf, and began quietly flipping through it. She wasn't causing disruption. She wasn't demanding attention. She was simply there, being a child in the way well-behaved children are, present but unobtrusive. Camilla entered a few minutes later, carrying a glass of water, finishing a quiet laugh with one of her long-standing aides. Her mood was light. She spotted the children, gave a brief collective smile, and turned her attention toward the adult conversation across the room. George and Louis had drifted toward Charles. Charlotte stayed where she was. Then, after a few minutes of quiet, Charlotte looked up from her book and asked politely, "May I play the piano for a bit?" "Just quietly." Camilla turned and looked at her. There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. "Darling, that's not necessary. Let the grown-ups enjoy some peace. Why don't you sit still like a proper young lady?" It wasn't shouted. It wasn't cruel in any theatrical way. But the words landed like a door closing. The tone was pointed. The implication was clear. Charlotte's presence, her voice, her simple and polite request, had been treated as an inconvenience. Charlotte's cheeks flushed. She closed her book and folded her hands in her lap without another word. Catherine had been standing nearby, speaking with Lady Lansdowne. She heard every word. Her eyes moved from Charlotte to Camilla and stayed there a moment longer than was comfortable. Camilla noticed. Their eyes met briefly before Camilla looked away and the room moved on as if nothing had happened. But Catherine had stopped moving on. That evening at Adelaide Cottage she tucked Charlotte into bed herself. The house was quiet. William was finishing a call. George was already asleep. Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's mattress and asked softly whether she had felt upset during the day. Charlotte looked at her for a moment. "A little." "You don't have to pretend," Catherine told her. Charlotte nodded slowly. "Granny Camilla doesn't like when I talk too much." Catherine kissed her forehead, stood up, and walked down the hall. When she passed the study, William looked up from his desk. "Is she all right?" "She's trying to be," Catherine said. William leaned back. "What happened?" She told him everything again, this time including the piano. She described the tone. She described Charlotte's face. She repeated her daughter's words back to him exactly as they had been said. "Granny Camilla doesn't like when I talk too much." William said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "We're not letting this continue." The next morning, Catherine made a decision. There was a charity garden event coming up, something Camilla had arranged for a group of royal grandchildren. Charlotte's name was on the list. Catherine removed it. She gave the household a vague explanation about a minor cold, and no one pushed back. But word reached Camilla anyway, as word always did inside these walls. Camilla raised a brow when her aide mentioned it. Then said, quietly, almost to herself, "Probably too delicate for a little mud." Catherine heard about that remark before the day was out. She didn't react to it outwardly. But internally, the last remaining threshold she had been carefully guarding was gone. This was no longer about managing a difficult dynamic between two women in the same family. This was about something being done deliberately and repeatedly to a child. And Catherine was done absorbing it quietly. But that is not all. Because the moment that finally forced everything into the open hadn't happened yet. That came at Highgrove. And when it did, there would be no more waiting, no more calibrated silence, no more giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. The invitation to Highgrove was framed as a relaxed family dinner. Charles's idea. A small private evening, just the immediate family, meant to ease the tension that had been quietly thickening over the past several weeks. The plan was simple. Good food, easy conversation, a chance to reset before the next round of royal engagements. Catherine agreed to come. She brought Charlotte to say goodnight to her grandfather before bedtime, a normal and unremarkable thing that had happened dozens of times before. They walked into the main lounge together. Charles was already there, warm as always, his face lifting when he saw his grandchildren. William was beside him. The fire was going. By all appearances, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. Camilla was seated near the fire, her glass of wine in hand, relaxed and unhurried. Charlotte walked in, looked toward Camilla, and said what she had been raised to say. "Good evening, Granny." Camilla did not smile. She looked at the child and said, with a lightness that made it somehow worse, "Are you sure you're not too tired to be here?" The room felt it. Every person in that space registered the words and what was underneath them. The implication wasn't subtle. Charlotte's presence had once again been framed as unnecessary. Her simply being in the room had been questioned. Catherine's expression changed. The polite softness she had carried through the door was gone. What replaced it was something quieter and considerably more serious. She turned to Charlotte, crouched slightly, and said calmly, "Why don't you say goodnight to Grandpa and head upstairs with Anna?" Charlotte looked up at her. Catherine gave her a small nod. The little girl crossed the room, hugged Charles tightly, and left with the nanny. The door clicked shut behind her. Silence followed. Camilla sat back, still holding her glass. She looked around the room with an air of mild bewilderment, as if uncertain what the fuss was about. Then she said lightly, "Well, she's very sensitive, isn't she?" William went still. Charles shifted in his chair. And Catherine stepped forward. "Keep watching." Because what she said next was the moment everything changed. Every word she chose was deliberate. There was no raised voice. No theatrics. No moment where emotion overtook intention. Catherine had not spent years inside this institution without learning that the most powerful thing a person could do in a room full of people trained to ignore outbursts was to speak with complete and unshakable calm. "No," she said. "She's not too sensitive. She's a child. And she deserves to be spoken to with kindness." Camilla raised a brow. "I didn't mean it that way. I was simply surprised she's still up at this hour. It's hardly something to get upset about." Catherine didn't blink. "It wasn't just tonight." The room went colder. Charles opened his mouth. "Darling, perhaps we should all just—" "No." Catherine's voice was still even. Still measured. But there was nothing in it that left room for redirection. "If it were one comment, we would move on. But it isn't one comment. It's a pattern. And I won't stand by while my daughter is made to feel less than." Camilla looked toward William. It was a reflex, the instinct of someone accustomed to men stepping in to smooth things over. But William said nothing. He stood exactly where he was, and his silence was the loudest thing in the room. Camilla tried again. "You're reading too much into this. You always take things so seriously." Children are resilient. Catherine's expression didn't shift by a single degree. Children remember how they're spoken to, especially by the people who are supposed to make them feel safe. There was nothing left for Camilla to counter with. She had tried lightness. She had tried deflection. She had tried pulling William in as a buffer. None of it had worked because Catherine hadn't come into this room looking for an argument. She had come in as a mother who had already made up her mind, and there is no negotiating with that. William spoke then, his voice low and direct. We're asking for basic respect. Charlotte hasn't done anything wrong. She's just being herself. That shouldn't be a problem for anyone in this family. Charles said nothing. He knew better. He had watched Catherine long enough to understand that when she drew a line, she had already thought through every step that came before it. This wasn't impulse. This was conclusion. Camilla set her glass down. She didn't apologize. But she didn't push back again either. The defense had run out of ground to stand on. Catherine excused herself. She walked out of the sitting room with the same steadiness she had walked in with, and William followed a few minutes later. Upstairs, she went straight to Charlotte's room. The little girl was still awake, lying quietly in the dark. Catherine sat beside her and took her hand without saying anything at first. Then, you did nothing wrong tonight. You were polite and you were kind. That's everything I will ever ask of you. Charlotte looked up at her. I tried to be. You don't have to try to be perfect, Catherine said. You just have to be you. She stayed until Charlotte's breathing slowed and her eyes closed. Then she walked back down the hall to where William was waiting. She doesn't need to like me, Catherine said, keeping her voice low. But she will treat Charlotte with respect. That is not negotiable. She will, William said. Because we're not letting this continue. Downstairs, Charles had changed the subject. Camilla sat with her glass refilled, saying little. She didn't offer an apology that night. She didn't seek one. But the architecture of the evening had shifted in a way that everyone present could feel and no one could undo. The days that followed were polite in the way that things sometimes become polite after a confrontation, not warm, not repaired, but careful. Measured. The kind of civility that signals awareness rather than comfort. Catherine made another quiet decision. Charlotte's upcoming school recital at Lambrook would be immediate family only. The palace described it as a scheduling conflict. No one inside the walls believed that, but no one said so either. In the royal world, the official explanation is always accepted in public, regardless of what is understood in private. Camilla kept her distance from Charlotte at the next two engagements. No comments about food. No remarks about behavior. No redirections about how a proper young lady ought to sit or speak or present herself. The silence where those comments used to be was noticed by everyone paying attention. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because Camilla had taken the warning without accepting it. And when the family gathered at Balmoral for the summer, one more moment was waiting that would test everything Catherine had built since Highgrove. Balmoral had always carried a particular weight within the royal family. It had been the late Queen's sanctuary, the one place where the institution seemed to exhale. Charles had inherited that relationship with the estate, and he kept the summer tradition intact. Every year, the family came. Every year, the fresh Scottish air and the wide open landscape created at least the feeling of stepping outside the usual pressures. This year, Catherine arrived with clear eyes and a quiet plan. She and William brought all three children as expected. But Catherine had already told William privately that she would not leave Charlotte alone. Not for a garden walk. Not for an afternoon tea. Not for any reason that put her daughter in a room with Camilla without Catherine present. The first few days were peaceful in the way Balmoral usually managed to be. Long walks across the grounds. Horseback riding. Dinners that stretched into the evening with laughter that didn't feel entirely performed. Charlotte began to ease back into herself. Catherine watched it happen and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Her daughter was running through the fields with George and Louis, helping the kitchen staff bake in the afternoons, chatting at breakfast without that careful guardedness she had been carrying since Windsor. It was the first time in weeks that Charlotte looked simply like a child. Then, on the fourth day, Catherine was in the drawing room with Lady Sarah and a small group of household aides. William had gone fishing with Charles. The children had been playing in the garden under staff supervision. For the first time since arriving, Catherine had let her attention rest. Just for a few minutes. Just long enough to be present in a conversation without one eye on the door. Then one of the household aides leaned toward her and said quietly, "I believe Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom with Her Majesty." Catherine's posture changed before she had consciously decided to move. She excused herself without explanation and walked briskly through the corridor toward the sunroom. As she got close, she heard voices through the partially open door. Camilla's first. Then Charlotte's silence where a response should have been. She stopped just outside and listened. "We don't always need to speak over others, Charlotte. It's important to listen. Sometimes your mommy forgets that too." Catherine opened the door. Camilla looked up, a flash of surprise crossing her face before her expression settled back into its usual composure. "There you are," Catherine said, her eyes on Charlotte. "I was looking for you, darling." Charlotte stood up immediately and crossed the room to her mother's side without a word. Camilla's voice came smooth and unbothered. "I was just having a word with her." "I heard," Catherine replied. And that was enough. Those two words carried everything. She had heard. She knew exactly what kind of word it had been. And she was not going to pretend otherwise. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The stillness in the room was already saying everything that needed to be said, and Camilla could feel it as clearly as anyone. "She was only," Camilla began. "She was only being a child," Catherine said. "And she doesn't need to be corrected every time she speaks." Camilla folded her arms. There was a practiced ease to the gesture, the body language of someone accustomed to having the last word. "I've raised children. I know when a girl is growing too fast for her own good." Catherine looked at her steadily. "She's growing up just fine. And she'll do so without being made to feel like a problem." The sentence landed without decoration. No dramatic pause built around it. No trembling voice to signal that emotion was winning over reason. Just the words themselves, clear and final, from a woman who had decided somewhere between Highgrove and this sunroom that she was completely finished with careful. "I'd like a bit more kindness around her," Catherine added. "That shouldn't be too much to ask." Camilla didn't answer. Her silence was the kind that people use when they have things to say but have calculated that saying them would cost more than staying quiet. It was not the silence of someone who had been moved. It was the silence of someone who had been outmaneuvered and knew it. Catherine didn't wait for a response. She put her hand gently on Charlotte's shoulder and guided her out of the sunroom and into the corridor, pulling the door closed behind them. She knelt down in the hallway so that she and Charlotte were at the same level. The little girl's eyes were wet at the corners, but she hadn't cried. She was holding herself together in the way that children do when they have learned that holding themselves together is what's expected of them, and that realization alone was enough to make Catherine's chest ache. "You did nothing wrong," Catherine said quietly. "Not today. Not any of the days before today." Charlotte nodded but didn't speak. "You never need to be afraid of speaking up," Catherine told her. "Not ever. Do you understand me?" Charlotte nodded again, and this time something in her face shifted. The tightness around her eyes loosened just slightly. It was a small thing. But Catherine had been watching her daughter's face closely enough for weeks now that she caught it immediately, and it meant everything. They walked back toward the main house together, Charlotte's hand in hers. By the end of that week at Balmoral, something had visibly changed in the way Camilla moved through shared spaces. At mealtimes she chose seats farther from the children. She didn't comment on what they ate, or how they sat, or whether they were being too loud or too quiet. She didn't redirect Charlotte's conversations or suggest that her contributions to the table were unwelcome. The running commentary of small corrections that had followed Charlotte through every gathering for months had simply stopped. It wasn't warmth. No one was pretending it was warmth. But it was absence, and in this particular situation, absence was exactly what Catherine had been asking for. The household staff noticed. Senior aides noticed. Charles noticed, and said nothing because there was nothing useful left for him to say. He had tried to smooth things over at Highgrove and it hadn't worked. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that Catherine had not been asking for mediation. She had been issuing a conclusion, and conclusions don't require smoothing. The summer ended the way Balmoral summers always end. Photographs on the castle steps. The family arranged in careful formation, smiling for the cameras waiting at the gate. Waves for the well-wishers gathered at the edge of the grounds. All of it exactly as it had always looked from the outside. But inside, something had been permanently rearranged. Camilla had lost something she hadn't fully recognized she was spending until it was gone. Not Catherine's affection, that had always been complicated and managed rather than warm. What she had lost was Catherine's tolerance. The willingness to absorb small moments, and file them away and keep showing up with a composed face and an outstretched hand. That tolerance had been a choice Catherine made every single day, and she had quietly stopped making it. The public would never see this. The press releases wouldn't mention it. The coordinated photographs would continue to suggest a family moving forward in unity. But the people inside those walls understood that something had shifted in a way that couldn't be unshifted. Charlotte, for her part, began to return to herself fully in the weeks that followed Balmoral. The guardedness that had settled into her posture over those difficult months gradually lifted. She came home from school chatty and bright. She asked questions at dinner without hesitating first. She played the piano when she felt like it, and nobody told her to stop. Catherine watched all of this, and said nothing about it to anyone. She didn't need to. The outcome was the point. Everything she had done, every room she had walked into, every careful and deliberate sentence she had chosen, had been aimed at exactly this. Her daughter moving through her own life without shrinking. William watched it too, and the two of them didn't need to discuss it. They had made their decision together at Adelaide Cottage weeks before any of the confrontations happened. They had decided that no amount of institutional peace was worth their daughter's confidence. Everything after that had simply been follow-through. There are things that happen inside royal families that never reach the public. Private dinners that never get written about. Conversations in corridors that no press release will ever reference. Moments where a child looks at the floor and folds her hands and a mother decides she has seen enough. These moments don't show up in the official record. They show up in the people those children eventually become. Charlotte will grow up knowing that her mother saw what was happening and did something about it. That the adults in her life didn't look away when it was uncomfortable to look. That she was never required to make herself smaller to make someone else more comfortable. That is not a small thing to carry into adulthood. In a family built on centuries of deference and restraint, it may be the most radical gift Catherine could have given her. Camilla remained present at public engagements. The photographs kept coming. The official warmth was maintained at the level required by the institution. But Catherine had drawn her line, and even in a world built on hierarchy in appearance, and the careful management of everything that might otherwise become a story, some lines don't move once they've been drawn. What would you have done in Catherine's position? Do you think Camilla understood the damage she was causing, or was this simply a clash between two women with entirely different ideas about how children should behave inside a royal family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. If this story stayed with you, make sure you like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Click the video on your screen right now, because the next story is one you will not want to walk away from.